Question 1. Compliance review shows that the virtualized storage infrastructure for sensitive customer data is utilizing a solution that has not been explicitly validated against the data protection and integrity standards mandated by the relevant financial services regulatory body. The operations team is pushing for an immediate upgrade to a newer, more performant storage technology to meet increased demand. But the compliance department has raised concerns about the unverified nature of the proposed solution. Which of the following approaches best ensures adherence to the regulatory framework while addressing operational needs? Option A. Deploy a temporary, less performant but compliant storage solution immediately to meet regulatory requirements, while simultaneously initiating a formal procurement process for a long-term, certified, and performant solution. Option B. Proceed with the newer, more performant storage technology proposed by the operations team, assuming it meets general industry best practices for data security, and address any potential compliance gaps post-implementation. Option C. Select a storage solution that has undergone independent third-party certification for data protection and integrity, aligning with the specific requirements of the financial services regulatory body, and implement it after a thorough risk assessment. Option D. Implement the newer, more performant storage technology and rely on the vendor's assurances of compliance, with a plan to conduct an internal audit within the next fiscal year to identify any potential issues. Correct answer is C. Select a storage solution that has undergone independent third-party certification for data protection and integrity, aligning with the specific requirements of the financial services regulatory body, and implement it after a thorough risk assessment. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in virtualization environments where the need for rapid deployment and resource allocation can sometimes conflict with the strict requirements of data integrity and auditability mandated by regulatory frameworks. The professional is tasked with ensuring that a critical virtualization component, specifically related to storage, meets compliance standards without compromising operational efficiency. The challenge lies in balancing the immediate operational need for a functional storage solution with the long-term implications of non-compliance, which can lead to significant financial penalties, reputational damage, and operational disruptions. Careful judgment is required to select a solution that is both technically sound and legally defensible. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves selecting a storage solution that has undergone rigorous testing and certification processes specifically for the regulated environment. This typically means choosing hardware and software components that are listed on approved vendor lists or have met specific security and reliability standards defined by the relevant regulatory bodies. For example, if the jurisdiction mandates specific data protection standards, e.g., FIPS 140-2, for encryption in U.S. federal systems, or similar standards in other regulated sectors, the chosen solution must demonstrably meet these. This approach represents best professional practice because it directly addresses the core compliance requirement, ensuring that the technology used is validated to protect sensitive data and maintain system integrity as per legal and regulatory mandates. It prioritizes risk mitigation by relying on pre-vetted and approved technologies, thereby minimizing the likelihood of future compliance failures. Incorrect approaches analysis. Implementing a storage solution that has not been formally vetted or certified against the specific regulatory requirements is a significant professional and ethical failure. This could involve using a generic, off-the-shelf solution without verifying its compliance status, or relying on vendor claims without independent validation. Such an approach ignores the explicit mandates of the regulatory framework, which often requires demonstrable proof of compliance, not just a belief that a solution might work. This failure can lead to severe consequences, including data breaches, unauthorized access, and failure to meet audit requirements, all of which carry legal and financial repercussions. Furthermore, it demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a disregard for the professional responsibility to protect sensitive information and maintain system integrity according to established legal standards. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this field must adopt a risk-based approach to technology selection, especially in regulated environments. The decision-making process should begin with a thorough understanding of the applicable regulatory framework and its specific requirements for virtualization and data storage. This involves consulting official documentation, seeking guidance from compliance officers, and prioritizing solutions that have a proven track record of meeting these standards. When faced with operational pressures, it is crucial to remember that compliance is not optional. The professional should always advocate for solutions that meet both technical and regulatory needs, even if it requires more time or resources upfront. If a compliance solution is not immediately available, the professional should explore interim measures that maintain compliance, while a long-term compliance solution is procured and implemented, always documenting the rationale and risks associated with any deviation. Question 2. Cost-benefit analysis shows that implementing a robust disaster recovery solution for critical virtualized financial services applications is essential, but the exact technical implementation requires careful consideration of regulatory compliance. Given the jurisdiction's strict data residency laws and the financial sector's stringent uptime requirements, which approach best balances regulatory adherence with operational efficiency. Option A. Deploy a disaster recovery solution using older, less expensive hardware and software, prioritizing cost savings over the ability to meet the most demanding RTO and RPO targets, and deferring compliance audits until a later date. Option B. Implement a complex, cutting-edge virtualization technology with advanced features that exceed current regulatory requirements, without a clear business case or detailed cost-benefit justification beyond perceived technological superiority. Option C. Utilize a single, cost-effective off-site data center for backups, relying on a manual restoration process for disaster recovery, and assume that compliance with data residency is met by the physical location of the backup media. Option D. Develop a multi-region active-active high-availability cluster using geographically dispersed, compliant cloud infrastructure, ensuring data is replicated synchronously to meet strict RPO and RTO mandates, and regularly audit compliance with data residency and security regulations. The correct answer is D. Develop a multi-region active-active high-availability cluster using geographically dispersed, compliant cloud infrastructure, ensuring data is replicated synchronously to meet strict RPO and RTO mandates, and regularly audit compliance with data residency and security regulations. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in IT infrastructure management, balancing the need for robust disaster recovery with the financial realities of implementation and ongoing maintenance. The professional challenge lies in interpreting and applying regulatory requirements for business continuity and data protection within the context of available resources, ensuring that the chosen solution not only meets but exceeds minimum compliance standards while remaining cost-effective. Careful judgment is required to avoid over-engineering or under-provisioning, both of which can lead to regulatory non-compliance or operational failure. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a comprehensive understanding of the regulatory landscape, specifically focusing on the implications of data residency and recovery time objectives, RTO, and recovery point objectives, RPO, as mandated by relevant data protection and financial services regulations. By engaging with legal and compliance teams, the IT department ensures that the proposed virtualization and high availability strategy aligns with legal obligations, such as those pertaining to data sovereignty and the timely restoration of critical services. This proactive engagement mitigates the risk of regulatory penalties and reputational damage. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the cheapest available off-site storage, without considering data sovereignty or RTO/RPO requirements, would be a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This would likely violate data protection laws that mandate where data can be stored and processed, and fail to meet the business's operational needs for rapid service restoration, potentially leading to breaches of service-level agreements and customer trust. Another incorrect approach, which involves implementing a complex, expensive solution without a clear business case or regulatory justification, represents a failure in professional stewardship of resources and a disregard for cost-benefit principles, potentially leading to wasted expenditure and a lack of demonstrable value. A third incorrect approach, which relies on outdated or unsupported virtualization technologies for critical systems, poses a direct risk to business continuity and data integrity, and could be deemed a failure to adhere to industry best practices and potentially specific regulatory guidance on system lifecycle management. The professional decision-making process should involve a structured risk assessment, a thorough review of applicable regulations, consultation with legal and compliance experts, and a clear articulation of the business impact of potential failures. This process should then inform the selection of virtualization and high-availability solutions that demonstrably meet both regulatory mandates and business objectives, with a clear justification for the chosen level of investment based on the identified risks and benefits. Question 3. Consider a scenario where a financial services firm is planning to deploy a new virtualized trading platform requiring high availability. The firm operates under a strict regulatory framework that mandates specific data residency requirements and audit trail logging for all financial transactions. The IT team is evaluating several high-availability solutions, each with different architectural approaches to data replication and failover. Which of the following approaches best ensures regulatory compliance for the new virtualized trading platform? Option A. Select a high-availability solution that offers the fastest failover times and lowest latency, and then address any potential regulatory concerns post-deployment through configuration adjustments. Option B. Prioritize a high-availability solution that has a proven track record in the financial industry and consult with the firm's compliance and legal departments to confirm its adherence to all relevant data residency and audit trail logging regulations before final selection. Option C. Choose a high-availability solution based solely on its technical specifications and cost-effectiveness, with the understanding that the firm's existing compliance policies will automatically cover the new environment. Option D. Implement a high-availability solution that utilizes cloud-based replication services, assuming that cloud providers inherently meet all regulatory requirements for financial data. Correct answer is A. Select a high-availability solution that offers the fastest failover times and lowest latency, and then address any potential regulatory concerns post-deployment through configuration adjustments. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between rapid deployment of new virtualization technologies and the stringent regulatory requirements for data protection and system integrity. Organizations must balance innovation with compliance, ensuring that any new virtualized environment adheres to established legal and ethical standards. Careful judgment is required to select solutions that not only meet technical performance goals, but also satisfy regulatory obligations. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a thorough understanding and application of the relevant regulatory framework. Specifically, it involves proactive engagement with compliance officers and legal counsel to ensure that the chosen high-availability solution for the virtualized environment meets all stipulated data residency, privacy, and security requirements. This aligns with the principle of privacy by design and security by design, which are fundamental to regulatory compliance in data handling. Adhering to these established protocols demonstrates a commitment to responsible technology adoption and mitigates the risk of legal penalties and reputational damage. An incorrect approach that bypasses or inadequately addresses regulatory requirements poses significant ethical and legal failures. For instance, selecting a high-availability solution without verifying its compliance with data residency laws could lead to the unauthorized transfer of sensitive data across borders, violating regulations like GDPR, if applicable to the exam's jurisdiction, though for this exam we assume a specific, unstated jurisdiction's framework. Another failure would be implementing a solution that does not meet mandated security standards for data protection, potentially exposing sensitive information to breaches and contravening data security legislation. Such actions demonstrate a disregard for legal obligations and professional ethics, prioritizing expediency over compliance. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying all applicable regulatory mandates. This should be followed by a risk assessment of potential virtualization and high-availability solutions against these mandates. Collaboration with legal, compliance, and security teams is crucial throughout the selection and implementation process. Documenting all compliance checks and decisions provides an audit trail and reinforces accountability. Question 4. The investigation demonstrates that a newly implemented disaster recovery solution, designed for rapid failover to an off-site location, may be inadvertently exposing sensitive customer data to regulatory noncompliance due to the chosen replication method, and the data residency status of the secondary site. Option A. Prioritize the technical performance and speed of the disaster recovery failover process, assuming that any regulatory concerns can be addressed retrospectively after the system is fully operational. Option B. Conduct a thorough audit of the disaster recovery solution, verifying encryption protocols for data in transit and at rest, confirming data residency compliance of the secondary site, and updating all relevant documentation and data processing agreements to reflect the findings and necessary adjustments. Option C. Rely on the cloud provider's standard security certifications and contractual terms to assume that the disaster recovery solution inherently meets all applicable data protection and privacy regulations. Option D. Immediately cease all data replication to the off-site location to prevent further potential regulatory violations, and postpone the full disaster recovery testing until a compliant solution can be identified. The correct answer is B. Conduct a thorough audit of the disaster recovery solution, verifying encryption protocols for data in transit and at rest, confirming data residency compliance of the secondary site, and updating all relevant documentation and data processing agreements to reflect the findings and necessary adjustments. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge rooted in the critical need for regulatory compliance within a virtualization and high availability environment. The core difficulty lies in balancing the technical imperative of rapid disaster recovery, DR, implementation with the stringent requirements of data protection and privacy regulations. Organizations must ensure that their DR strategies, particularly those involving off-site or cloud-based replication, do not inadvertently expose sensitive data or violate data residency laws. Investigations' findings highlight a potential gap between operational expediency and legal obligations, demanding careful judgment to rectify the situation without compromising business continuity. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a comprehensive review and remediation of the DR solution to align with all applicable data protection and privacy regulations. This means verifying that data replication mechanisms are secure, encrypted both in transit and at rest, and that the chosen DR site complies with any data residency requirements. Furthermore, it necessitates updating all relevant documentation, including DR plans and data processing agreements, to accurately reflect the implemented safeguards and regulatory adherence. This approach represents best professional practice because it directly addresses the identified regulatory failures by prioritizing compliance. It demonstrates a commitment to responsible data handling and risk management, which are fundamental ethical and legal obligations in IT operations. Adhering to these principles safeguards the organization from legal penalties, reputational damage, and loss of customer trust. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves solely focusing on the technical performance of the DR solution without addressing the regulatory concerns. This is a significant regulatory and ethical failure because it ignores the legal mandate to protect sensitive data. It prioritizes speed and functionality over compliance, potentially leading to breaches of data privacy laws and severe legal repercussions. Another incorrect approach is to simply disable data replication to the potentially non-compliant site without a proper remediation plan. While this might temporarily mitigate the immediate regulatory risk, it undermines the high availability and disaster recovery objectives. This represents a failure in professional judgment and risk management, as it creates a new vulnerability by neglecting the business continuity requirements without a viable alternative. It also fails to address the root cause of the non-compliance. A third incorrect approach is to assume that the cloud provider's standard security measures automatically satisfy all regulatory requirements. This is a critical regulatory and ethical failure stemming from a lack of due diligence. Organizations are ultimately responsible for ensuring their data processing activities comply with regulations, regardless of the infrastructure provider. Relying on assumptions without explicit verification and contractual assurances is a breach of professional responsibility and can lead to significant compliance violations. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such situations should adopt a structured decision-making process. First, thoroughly understand the specific regulatory framework applicable to the data being handled and the operational context. Second, conduct a detailed risk assessment, identifying potential compliance gaps in the current DR solution. Third, Prioritize remediation efforts based on the severity of the regulatory risk and the impact on business continuity. Fourth, engage with legal and compliance teams to ensure proposed solutions meet all requirements. Finally, implement, document, and regularly audit the DR solution to maintain ongoing compliance and operational resilience. This systematic approach ensures that technical solutions are not only effective, but also legally sound and ethically responsible. Question 5. Upon reviewing the proposed implementation of advanced virtualization features, including live migration and distributed resource scheduling, for enhanced high availability, the IT department has identified potential compliance concerns regarding data residency and audit trail integrity. The organization operates under a strict regulatory framework that mandates specific controls for sensitive data. What is the most professionally responsible course of action to ensure both technological advancement and regulatory adherence? Option A. Proceed with the deployment of the new virtualization features immediately to capitalize on performance benefits, assuming that standard virtualization security best practices will inherently satisfy regulatory needs. Option B. Implement the new virtualization features and then retrospectively attempt to address any compliance issues that may arise during post-deployment audits. Option C. Conduct a thorough risk assessment of the proposed virtualization features against all applicable regulatory requirements, consult with compliance officers and legal counsel, and obtain formal approval before proceeding with deployment. Option D. Delay the deployment of the new virtualization features indefinitely until a comprehensive understanding of all potential compliance implications can be achieved, even if it means foregoing immediate performance gains. The correct answer is C. Conduct a thorough risk assessment of the proposed virtualization features against all applicable regulatory requirements, consult with compliance officers and legal counsel, and obtain formal approval before proceeding with deployment. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between rapid deployment of new virtualization technologies and the stringent regulatory requirements for data protection and system integrity. The organization is seeking to leverage advanced features for improved performance and availability, but must do so without compromising its adherence to established compliance frameworks. Careful judgment is required to balance innovation with the non-negotiable aspects of regulatory adherence. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a thorough understanding and documented validation of the chosen virtualization solutions, compliance with the relevant regulatory framework. This involves proactive engagement with compliance officers and legal counsel to ensure that the implementation of high-availability features, such as live migration or clustering, does not inadvertently create vulnerabilities or violate data residency, access control, or audit trail requirements. By conducting a comprehensive risk assessment and obtaining formal approval, the organization demonstrates a commitment to responsible technology adoption and mitigates potential legal and financial repercussions. This aligns with the ethical obligation to protect sensitive data and maintain system security as mandated by regulatory bodies. An incorrect approach that involves deploying the new virtualization features without prior regulatory review and approval is professionally unacceptable. This constitutes a significant regulatory failure because it bypasses essential compliance checks, potentially leading to violations of data privacy laws, security standards, or industry-specific regulations. Ethically, it represents a disregard for the organization's responsibility to protect its clients' or users' data and to operate within legal boundaries. Another incorrect approach, which is to assume that standard virtualization best practices automatically satisfy all regulatory requirements, is also professionally unsound. While general best practices are valuable, they are not a substitute for specific regulatory mandates. This approach risks overlooking unique compliance obligations related to data handling, logging, or disaster recovery that are specific to the organization's industry or jurisdiction. The regulatory or ethical failure here lies in a potentially dangerous oversimplification of compliance, leading to a false sense of security and actual noncompliance. A third incorrect approach, which is to delay the deployment indefinitely due to perceived complexity of compliance, is also a failure in professional decision-making. While caution is warranted, an indefinite delay hinders the organization's ability to benefit from technological advancements and maintain competitive parity. The professional reasoning process should involve a structured approach to risk management and compliance. This includes identifying all applicable regulations, assessing the impact of the proposed virtualization changes on compliance, developing mitigation strategies, and seeking expert advice. The goal is to find a path that allows for technological progress while ensuring robust regulatory adherence, rather than allowing compliance concerns to become an insurmountable barrier. Question 6. Operational review demonstrates that a new project requires the deployment of virtual machines to host sensitive customer data. The project timeline is aggressive, and the IT team is considering leveraging a public cloud provider's nearest available data center to expedite provisioning. However, the organization operates under UK regulatory frameworks governing data protection and residency. What is the most critical consideration for the IT team when selecting the deployment region for these virtual machines? Option A. The virtual machines should be deployed in a region with the lowest cost to optimize operational expenditure. Option B. The chosen cloud region must be located within the United Kingdom to comply with UK data residency requirements and data protection laws. Option C. The cloud provider's general security certifications should be reviewed to ensure a baseline level of protection. Option D. The cloud provider's nearest available data center should be selected to minimize network latency and improve application performance. Correct answer is B. The chosen cloud region must be located within the United Kingdom to comply with UK data residency requirements and data protection laws. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in virtualization environments where the need for rapid deployment and resource allocation can sometimes conflict with the stringent requirements of regulatory compliance, particularly concerning data residency and access controls. The challenge lies in balancing operational agility with the imperative to adhere to specific legal and industry standards that govern how and where sensitive data is processed and stored. Misinterpreting or overlooking these requirements can lead to significant legal repercussions, reputational damage, and loss of customer trust. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a thorough understanding of the applicable regulatory framework, which in this context is assumed to be the UK's data protection legislation, e.g., UK GDPR, and relevant industry-specific guidelines. Best professional practice dictates that any virtualization strategy, including the deployment of new virtual machines and the migration of existing workloads, must explicitly consider and incorporate data residency requirements. This means ensuring that virtual machines processing or storing regulated data are provisioned within geographically approved data centers that comply with the UK's data protection laws. Furthermore, robust access control mechanisms, aligned with regulatory mandates for data security, must be implemented and audited. This proactive, compliance-first approach minimizes risk and ensures that operational efficiency does not come at the expense of legal obligations. Incorrect approaches analysis. Deploying virtual machines in a cloud region outside the UK without verifying its compliance with UK GDPR and data residency laws represents a direct violation of regulatory requirements. This failure to adhere to data localization mandates can result in substantial fines and legal action. Similarly, prioritizing speed of deployment over a documented risk assessment that includes regulatory impact is a critical ethical and professional failing. It demonstrates a disregard for due diligence and the potential consequences of non-compliance. Implementing standard, non-customized security configurations without assessing their alignment with specific regulatory mandates for data protection and access control is also problematic. This generic approach may not meet the heightened security standards required by regulations, leaving sensitive data vulnerable and the organization non-compliant. Professional reasoning. Professionals in virtualization and high availability must adopt a risk-based, compliance-driven decision-making process. This involves 1. Identifying all applicable regulatory frameworks and their specific requirements related to data handling, residency, and security. 2. Integrating these requirements into the design and deployment phases of any virtualization project. 3. Conducting thorough risk assessments that explicitly evaluate the compliance implications of technical choices. 4. Implementing and continuously monitoring controls to ensure ongoing adherence to regulations. 5. seeking expert legal and compliance advice when uncertainties arise. This systematic approach ensures that operational objectives are met without compromising legal and ethical responsibilities. Question 7. Examination of the data shows that a virtualization infrastructure supporting critical business applications is experiencing intermittent performance degradation and occasional service disruptions. The IT team is under pressure to implement immediate solutions to improve availability and performance. Which of the following approaches to risk assessment would be most professionally sound and compliant with best practices for ensuring system resilience? Option A. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment that identifies all potential threats, vulnerabilities, and their potential impacts on system availability and data integrity, followed by a prioritized mitigation plan based on risk severity. Option B. Prioritize risk mitigation based on which solutions are the quickest and easiest to implement, regardless of the actual risk level they address. Option C. Rely exclusively on the default security and availability settings provided by the virtualization platform vendor, assuming they are sufficient for all operational scenarios. Option D. Focus mitigation efforts solely on addressing the symptoms of the current performance degradation and service disruptions, as these are the most immediate and visible problems. The correct answer is A. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment that identifies all potential threats, vulnerabilities, and their potential impacts on system availability and data integrity, followed by a prioritized mitigation plan based on risk severity. Explanation. Scenario analysis. The scenario presents a common challenge in virtualization and high availability environments, balancing the need for robust risk assessment with the practical constraints of resource allocation and operational demands. The core difficulty lies in identifying and prioritizing risks that could impact service continuity and data integrity, especially when faced with limited time and personnel. A superficial or incomplete risk assessment can lead to critical vulnerabilities being overlooked, potentially resulting in significant downtime, data loss, or regulatory noncompliance. Conversely, an overly exhaustive assessment can become a bottleneck, delaying essential security and availability improvements. Professional challenge is to conduct a risk assessment that is both comprehensive enough to be effective and efficient enough to be actionable within the given context. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a structured and systematic methodology for risk assessment that aligns with industry best practices and regulatory expectations for data protection and service availability. This methodology typically includes identifying assets, threats, vulnerabilities, and potential impacts, followed by an evaluation of the likelihood and severity of each risk. Prioritization is then based on a risk matrix or scoring system, allowing for the allocation of resources to mitigate the most critical risks first. This approach is best professional practice because it provides a defensible and repeatable process for managing risk. It ensures that decisions regarding security controls and high availability measures are data-driven and aligned with business objectives and regulatory requirements, such as those implicitly or explicitly covered by the LPIC-3 virtualization and high availability exam scope, which emphasizes operational resilience and data integrity. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to focus solely on known, recent incidents without considering potential future threats or less obvious vulnerabilities. This reactive stance fails to proactively identify and address emerging risks, leaving the system susceptible to novel attack vectors or unforeseen failures. It represents a regulatory and ethical failure by not adhering to the principle of due diligence in protecting data and ensuring service availability. Another incorrect approach is to rely entirely on vendor-provided security assessments without independent validation. While vendor assessments can be valuable, they may not fully account for the specific configuration, integration, or operational context of the deployed environment. This can lead to a false sense of security and a failure to identify unique risks, potentially violating the responsibility to ensure a comprehensive understanding of the system's security posture. A third incorrect approach is to prioritize risks based on the perceived ease of mitigation rather than their actual impact or likelihood. This can lead to significant risks being deferred indefinitely because they are perceived as complex or costly to address, while minor risks are over-mitigated. This approach is professionally unacceptable as it deviates from a rational, impact-based risk management framework and can result in a misallocation of resources, leaving critical systems exposed. Professional reasoning. professionals should adopt a risk-based approach that is systematic, documented, and regularly reviewed. This involves understanding the organization's critical assets and services, identifying potential threats and vulnerabilities, and assessing the likelihood and impact of those threats materializing. A risk matrix or scoring system should be used to prioritize risks, guiding the allocation of resources for mitigation. This process should be integrated into the overall IT governance framework and be responsive to changes in the threat landscape and business requirements. Regular training and awareness programs for staff are also crucial to foster a security-conscious culture. Question 8. Performance analysis shows that several critical virtualized services are experiencing intermittent availability issues, leading to user complaints and potential business disruption. The IT team is considering implementing a comprehensive high-availability solution across the entire virtual infrastructure to address these concerns. Which of the following approaches best aligns with professional best practices for managing risk in this scenario? Option A. Conduct a thorough risk assessment to identify critical assets, potential threats, their likelihood and impact, and evaluate existing controls before designing and implementing any high-availability solution. Option B. Focus exclusively on technical redundancy for hardware and network components, assuming that software and operational factors are less critical to overall availability. Option C. Immediately deploy the most advanced and feature-rich high-availability clustering technology available for all virtual machines to ensure maximum uptime. Option D. Implement a standardized high-availability solution that has worked well in previous, unrelated projects without specific analysis of the current environment's risks. The correct answer is A. Conduct a thorough risk assessment to identify critical assets, potential threats, their likelihood and impact, and evaluate existing controls before designing and implementing any high-availability solution. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in virtualization and high-availability environments, balancing the need for robust risk mitigation with the practical constraints of resource allocation and operational impact. The professional challenge lies in accurately assessing the likelihood and impact of potential failures within a complex, interconnected virtual infrastructure, and then translating that assessment into actionable, cost-effective, and compliant security and availability strategies. The interconnectedness of virtual machines, shared storage, and network components means a single point of failure can have cascading effects, making a thorough risk assessment paramount. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a systematic, data-driven risk assessment that prioritizes threats based on their potential impact and likelihood. This aligns with best practices in IT governance and compliance, which mandate a proactive approach to security and availability. By identifying critical assets, analyzing potential threats, e.g., hardware failure, software corruption, human error, cyber attacks, and evaluating existing controls, an organization can determine the residual risk. This allows for informed decisions on implementing appropriate mitigation strategies, such as redundant hardware, robust backup and recovery procedures, and disaster recovery plans, all while ensuring compliance with relevant regulations that often require demonstrable risk management processes. This approach is professionally sound because it is objective, repeatable, and directly addresses the organization's specific risk profile. Incorrect approach is analysis. Implementing a one-size-fits-all high-availability solution without a prior risk assessment is professionally unacceptable. This approach ignores the unique risk landscape of the organization, potentially leading to overspending on unnecessary redundancy or, conversely, under-provisioning critical systems, thereby failing to meet availability requirements and potentially violating regulatory obligations to maintain service continuity. Focusing solely on the most expensive or technically advanced high-availability solutions without considering their cost-effectiveness or alignment with identified risks is also professionally unsound. This can lead to inefficient resource allocation and may not address the most probable or impactful threats. Regulations often require a cost-benefit analysis in security and availability investments, which this approach bypasses, ignoring potential human error or operational risks in favor of purely technical solutions is a significant ethical and professional failure. While technical controls are vital, operational procedures, training, and access controls are equally important in preventing downtime and data loss. A failure to consider these aspects can lead to preventable incidents and noncompliance with regulations that emphasize comprehensive security management. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach risk assessment in virtualization and high availability by first understanding the business context and critical services. This involves identifying all virtualized components, their dependencies, and the data they process. Next, a comprehensive threat modeling exercise should be conducted, considering both internal and external threats. The likelihood and impact of each threat should be assessed, leading to a prioritized list of risks. Based on this prioritization, appropriate controls and mitigation strategies, e.g., clustering, replication, backups, disaster recovery plans should be selected, considering their effectiveness, cost, and operational feasibility. Regular review and updating of the risk assessment are crucial to adapt to evolving threats and changes in the IT environment. This systematic process ensures that resources are allocated effectively to manage the most significant risks, thereby achieving the required levels of availability and compliance. Question 9. Stakeholder feedback indicates a growing concern regarding the resilience and security posture of the organization's virtualized infrastructure and high availability solutions. To address these concerns effectively and demonstrate due diligence, what is the most appropriate initial step in managing these perceived risks? Option A. Schedule a series of meetings with stakeholders to gather more detailed, specific examples of their concerns before initiating any technical analysis. Option B. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment to identify, analyze, and prioritize potential threats and vulnerabilities within the virtualization and high availability environment, and develop a documented mitigation plan. Option C. Commission an external audit of the entire virtualization and high availability infrastructure to identify any compliance gaps or security weaknesses. Option D. Immediately implement a broad range of new security patches and performance tuning measures across all virtual machines and hosts to proactively address potential issues. The correct answer is B. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment to identify, analyze, and prioritize potential threats and vulnerabilities within the virtualization and high availability environment, and develop a documented mitigation plan. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between maintaining robust virtualization and high availability infrastructure, and the need to respond to evolving stakeholder concerns regarding potential risks. The challenge lies in translating abstract feedback into concrete, actionable risk assessment strategies that are both effective and compliant with the LPIC-3 virtualization and high availability exams regulatory framework. The pressure to demonstrate proactive risk management without disrupting critical services or incurring unnecessary costs requires careful judgment and a structured approach. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a systematic and documented risk assessment process that directly addresses the stakeholder feedback. This entails identifying potential threats to the virtualization and high availability environment, e.g., hardware failure, software vulnerabilities, human error, external attacks, analyzing the likelihood and impact of these threats, and then developing appropriate mitigation strategies. This aligns with best professional practices for IT infrastructure management, emphasizing a proactive and evidence-based approach to security and reliability. From a regulatory perspective, a documented risk assessment is often a prerequisite for demonstrating due diligence and compliance with general IT governance principles, even if specific regulations for this exam are not explicitly detailed beyond the LPIC-3 scope. It ensures that decisions are not arbitrary, but are based on a thorough understanding of potential vulnerabilities and their consequences. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to dismiss the feedback as unsubstantiated or to implement superficial changes without a proper assessment. This represents a failure in professional responsibility and could lead to significant security or availability breaches. Ethically, it demonstrates a lack of responsiveness to stakeholder concerns and a disregard for potential risks. From a compliance standpoint, it fails to meet the implicit requirement of maintaining a secure and available system, which is the core of virtualization and high availability. Another incorrect approach is to overreact by implementing drastic, untested measures that could destabilize the existing infrastructure or introduce new risks. This lacks a balanced and analytical approach. Professionally, it is unsound engineering practice. Ethically, it could lead to service disruption and financial loss for the organization. Regulatory failure here would be in the inability to demonstrate a controlled and reasoned response to identified risks. A third incorrect approach is to focus solely on technical solutions without considering the broader context of the feedback or the potential impact on users and business operations. This narrow focus can lead to solutions that are technically sound but practically ineffective or even detrimental. It fails to integrate risk management with business objectives, a key aspect of professional IT management. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach such situations by first acknowledging and documenting all stakeholder feedback. This should be followed by a structured risk assessment process, which typically involves 1. Risk identification, brainstorming and documenting all potential threats and vulnerabilities relevant to the virtualization and high availability environment. 2. Risk analysis, evaluating the likelihood of each identified risk occurring and the potential impact if it does. 3. Risk evaluation, prioritizing risks based on their severity. 4. Risk treatment, developing and implementing strategies to mitigate, transfer, avoid, or accept risks. 5. Risk monitoring and review, continuously reviewing the effectiveness of risk treatments and updating the assessment as needed. This systematic process ensures that decisions are informed, justifiable, and aligned with the organization's overall risk appetite and operational requirements. Question 10. Analysis of the risk assessment process for a critical virtualized application, where the IT team has identified potential threats to its availability and integrity, but faces significant budget constraints, leading to a need for prioritized mitigation strategies. Which of the following approaches best aligns with professional best practices and regulatory expectations for managing such risks? Option A. Focus exclusively on implementing the most technically advanced high-availability features, such as active-active clustering, for every virtualized component, regardless of its specific criticality or failure probability. Option B. Implement a comprehensive suite of high-availability solutions for all components of the virtualized application, assuming this will cover all potential risks. Option C. Conduct a thorough risk assessment to identify, analyze, and prioritize threats based on likelihood and impact. Then implement targeted mitigation strategies for the highest priority risks within the available budget. Option D. Defer any significant risk mitigation efforts until a failure actually occurs, reasoning that the system has been stable thus far. The correct answer is C. Conduct a thorough risk assessment to identify, analyze, and prioritize threats based on likelihood and impact. Then implement targeted mitigation strategies for the highest priority risks within the available budget. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in virtualization and high availability environments, balancing the need for robust risk mitigation with the practical constraints of budget and operational complexity. The IT team is tasked with assessing the risks associated with a critical virtualized application, but they have limited resources. This necessitates a strategic approach to risk assessment that prioritizes effectively without overinvesting in unnecessary controls. The challenge lies in identifying the most impactful risks and selecting appropriate mitigation strategies that align with business objectives and regulatory expectations, all while operating within defined resource limitations. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a systematic and documented risk assessment process that identifies, analyzes, and prioritizes potential threats to the virtualized application's availability and integrity. This process should consider the likelihood of a threat occurring and the potential impact on the business. By focusing on the most critical risks, the team can allocate resources efficiently to implement targeted mitigation strategies, such as redundant infrastructure, regular backups, and robust monitoring. This aligns with best practices in IT risk management, which emphasize a proactive and evidence-based approach to security and availability. From a regulatory perspective, demonstrating a structured risk assessment and mitigation plan is often a requirement for compliance frameworks that mandate data protection and business continuity. Incorrect approach is analysis. Implementing a comprehensive suite of high-availability solutions without a prior risk assessment is a failure to adhere to a structured and cost-effective risk management framework. This approach is professionally unacceptable because it can lead to significant overspending on solutions that do not address the most critical risks, or worse, it might overlook significant vulnerabilities that are not covered by the implemented solution. It represents a reactive rather than proactive stance, potentially violating the principle of prudent resource allocation and failing to demonstrate due diligence in protecting critical assets. Focusing solely on the most technically complex high-availability features, such as active-active clustering for all components, without considering the actual business criticality or the likelihood of failure for each component, is another professionally unsound approach. This can result in an unnecessarily complex and expensive infrastructure that is difficult to manage and maintain. It fails to prioritize based on actual risk, potentially diverting resources from more pressing concerns. Ethically, it can be seen as a misallocation of company funds, ignoring potential risks because the current system has not experienced failures in the past is a critical regulatory and ethical failure. This approach demonstrates a lack of foresight and a disregard for the principle of continuous improvement and proactive risk management. Past performance is not indicative of future results, and a failure to anticipate and prepare for potential disruptions can lead to severe business impact, reputational damage, and non-compliance with regulations that mandate business continuity and disaster recovery planning. This approach is inherently risky and unprofessional. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach risk assessment by first understanding the business context and the criticality of the virtualized application. This involves engaging with stakeholders to identify critical business functions and the impact of their unavailability. The next step is to identify potential threats and vulnerabilities specific to the virtualization environment and the application. This can be achieved through various methods, including threat modeling, vulnerability scanning, and reviewing past incident reports. Once identified, risks should be analyzed based on their likelihood and impact, allowing for prioritization. Mitigation strategies should then be selected based on this prioritized list, considering cost-effectiveness and alignment with business objectives. Finally, the chosen strategies should be implemented, monitored, and regularly reviewed to ensure their continued effectiveness. This iterative process ensures that resources are used efficiently to address the most significant risks, thereby maintaining a strong security and availability posture. Question 11. The evaluation methodology shows that a critical virtualized application cluster has experienced an unexpected outage on its primary node. The secondary node is available, but the application state on the primary node is uncertain due to the abrupt failure. The immediate business requirement is to restore service as quickly as possible. What is the most professional and risk-mitigating approach to bring the application back online? Option A. Force a hard reset of the primary node and attempt to bring it back online to resume its role in the cluster. Option B. Decommission the failed primary node and attempt to rebuild the cluster on the secondary node from scratch. Option C. Immediately attempt a manual restart of the application services on the secondary node, assuming it has the latest available data. Option D. Initiate a graceful failover process to the secondary node, ensuring application state synchronization and performing post-failover verification checks before declaring the service restored. The correct answer is D. Initiate a graceful failover process to the secondary node, ensuring application state synchronization and performing post-failover verification checks before declaring the service restored. Explanation. The evaluation methodology shows that ensuring high availability for critical virtualized services requires a robust understanding of failover mechanisms and their implications for data integrity and service continuity. This scenario is professionally challenging because it demands a balance between rapid recovery and minimizing potential data loss or corruption, especially when dealing with complex distributed systems. The pressure to restore service quickly can lead to hasty decisions that overlook critical dependencies or failover complexities. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a systematic and tested failover process. This involves understanding the specific failover capabilities of the virtualization platform, the application's own high availability features, and the underlying storage. A well-documented and regularly tested failover plan, which includes graceful shutdown procedures and verification steps, minimizes the risk of data corruption and ensures that the service is restored to a known good state. This aligns with the principle of due diligence in maintaining IT infrastructure and adhering to service-level agreements, SLAs, which are often implicitly or explicitly governed by industry best practices and regulatory expectations for operational resilience. An incorrect approach that bypasses standard failover procedures and attempts a direct manual restart of services on a secondary node without proper synchronization or verification is professionally unacceptable. This could lead to data inconsistencies if the primary node's data was not fully committed, or if the secondary node starts with an outdated state. Such an action would likely violate operational procedures and could result in significant data loss or service disruption, potentially leading to breaches of SLAs and regulatory noncompliance if the service is subject to specific operational continuity requirements. Another incorrect approach, which involves immediately decommissioning the primary node without a thorough investigation of the root cause of the failure, is also professionally unsound. This premature action prevents learning from the incident, which is crucial for preventing future occurrences. It also risks discarding valuable diagnostic information that could be essential for root cause analysis and for improving the overall resilience of the system. From a professional standpoint, this demonstrates a lack of thoroughness and a failure to engage in continuous improvement. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve a structured incident response framework. This typically includes immediate containment of the issue, assessment of the impact, identification of potential recovery options, execution of the chosen recovery strategy with verification, and post-incident analysis. Professionals must consult documentation, understand the architecture of the virtualized environment and the applications running within it, and prioritize actions that minimize risk while achieving the objective of service restoration. Adherence to established operational procedures and change management processes is paramount. Question 12. The efficiency study reveals that the virtualization infrastructure is experiencing intermittent performance degradation, impacting critical business applications. A rapid response team is considering several immediate actions to address the issue. Which of the following actions, if taken without a thorough diagnostic process, poses the greatest risk to long-term system stability and compliance with availability mandates? Option A. Reviewing recent configuration changes and system logs for anomalies that correlate with the onset of performance degradation. Option B. Implementing a temporary, broad reallocation of compute and memory resources across all virtual machines to alleviate immediate strain. Option C. Performing a controlled rollback of recently applied software patches to virtual machine operating systems and hypervisors. Option D. Conducting a detailed performance analysis of the storage subsystem, network fabric, and hypervisor layer to identify specific bottlenecks. The correct answer is B. Implementing a temporary, broad reallocation of compute and memory resources across all virtual machines to alleviate immediate strain. Explanation. The efficiency study reveals that the current virtualization infrastructure is experiencing intermittent performance degradation, impacting critical business applications. This scenario is professionally challenging because it directly affects operational continuity and potentially compliance with service-level agreements, SLAs, and regulatory requirements for data availability and integrity. The challenge lies in accurately identifying the root cause of the performance issues within a complex, interconnected virtualized environment without disrupting ongoing operations or introducing new risks. The correct approach, which involves a systematic risk assessment of the virtualization infrastructure's components and their interdependencies, represents best professional practice. This methodology aligns with general IT governance principles and, in the context of virtualization and high availability, directly supports the objectives of ensuring system resilience and minimizing downtime. A thorough risk assessment would involve identifying potential failure points, e.g., storage bottlenecks, network congestion, hypervisor issues, resource contention, analyzing the likelihood and impact of each failure, and prioritizing mitigation strategies. This proactive and structured approach ensures that resources are allocated effectively to address the most significant threats to availability and performance, thereby safeguarding business operations and meeting any implicit or explicit regulatory expectations for system reliability. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on immediate symptom remediation without understanding the underlying causes is professionally unacceptable. For instance, randomly reallocating resources or restarting services without a diagnostic basis can mask deeper issues, lead to unintended consequences, or even exacerbate performance problems. This reactive approach fails to address the systemic risks inherent in the virtualization environment and could lead to repeated incidents, impacting business continuity and potentially violating regulatory obligations, related to system uptime and data accessibility. Another incorrect approach would be to implement a solution based on anecdotal evidence or the experience of a single team member without broader validation. This can lead to misdiagnosis and the implementation of ineffective or even detrimental changes. Such an approach lacks the rigor required for professional IT management and can result in wasted resources, prolonged downtime, and a failure to meet the expected standards of care, which are often implicitly or explicitly tied to regulatory frameworks governing operational stability. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve a structured incident response and problem management framework. This typically includes 1. Incident identification and logging, clearly defining the problem and its impact. 2. Diagnosis and root cause analysis, employing systematic troubleshooting techniques, including performance monitoring, log analysis, and configuration review to pinpoint the underlying cause. 3. Risk assessment, evaluating the identified root cause in terms of its potential impact on availability, performance, and security, and assessing the likelihood of recurrence. 4. Solution development and implementation, designing and applying a solution that addresses the root cause and mitigates associated risks, with a plan for verification and rollback if necessary. 5. Prevention and improvement, documenting lessons learned and implementing changes to prevent future occurrences, thereby continuously improving the resilience and efficiency of the virtualization infrastructure. Question 13. Research into best practices for disaster recovery in a virtualized environment. A financial services firm has experienced a critical storage failure impacting its primary production servers. The immediate goal is to restore services as quickly as possible. Considering the firm's regulatory obligations for data integrity and auditability, which of the following approaches represents the most professionally sound and compliant method for recovering the virtualized infrastructure and its data? Option A. Rebuild the entire virtualized infrastructure from scratch using default configurations, and then attempt to import data from the failed storage, without performing specific integrity checks on the imported data. Option B. Execute a phased recovery process, starting with restoring the core virtualization platform, followed by restoring critical data volumes from the most recent verified backup, and conducting thorough data integrity checks and application functionality tests before bringing services online. Option C. Immediately initiate a full restore from the most recent snapshot, prioritizing speed over any intermediate data validation steps, and then address any potential data inconsistencies post-restoration. Option D. Restore the virtual machines from the oldest available backup that appears to contain the necessary data, assuming it will be sufficient for immediate operational needs, and deferring any detailed verification until after the system is operational. Correct answer is C. Immediately initiate a full restore from the most recent snapshot, prioritizing speed over any intermediate data validation steps, and then address any potential data inconsistencies post-restoration. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in virtualization and high availability environments, balancing the need for rapid disaster recovery with the imperative to maintain data integrity and comply with regulatory requirements for data retention and auditability. The pressure to restore services quickly can lead to shortcuts that compromise these critical aspects. Professionals must navigate the tension between operational urgency and long-term compliance and security. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach prioritizes a phased recovery strategy that includes verification of data integrity and adherence to established backup and restore policies. This aligns with best practices for disaster recovery, which emphasize not just speed, but also the accuracy and completeness of restored data. From a regulatory perspective, this approach ensures that the restored environment can meet audit requirements and that data is not lost or corrupted, which could lead to compliance violations. It demonstrates a commitment to robust data management and risk mitigation. Incorrect approaches analysis. An approach that bypasses data integrity checks during restoration, while seemingly faster, poses significant regulatory and ethical risks. It could result in the restoration of corrupted or incomplete data, rendering the system unreliable and potentially violating data integrity regulations. Furthermore, it undermines auditability, as the restored state may not accurately reflect the pre-disaster state, making it difficult to trace transactions or verify compliance. Another incorrect approach involves restoring from an older, unverified backup without proper validation. This risks reintroducing vulnerabilities or data loss that occurred prior to the chosen backup point. Ethically and regulatorily, this is problematic as it fails to ensure the most current and accurate data is restored, potentially leading to business disruption and non-compliance with data currency requirements. Finally, an approach that neglects to document the recovery process and any deviations from standard procedures is professionally unsound and carries regulatory implications. Lack of documentation hinders post-incident analysis, prevents learning from the event, and critically makes it impossible to demonstrate compliance during an audit. Regulatory frameworks often mandate detailed record-keeping for disaster recovery and business continuity activities. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the criticality of the affected systems and the potential impact of downtime. This should be followed by a thorough assessment of available recovery options, considering their implications for data integrity, security, and regulatory compliance. The chosen recovery strategy must be documented, and all steps, including verification and validation, should be executed meticulously. Post-recovery, a comprehensive review and update of disaster recovery plans are essential to incorporate lessons learned. This systematic approach ensures that operational needs are met without compromising the organization's legal and ethical obligations. Question 14. Strategic planning requires a thorough evaluation of virtualization strategies to ensure both cost efficiency and robust service continuity. When considering a migration to a new virtualization platform, which approach best balances these objectives while adhering to best practices for security and high availability? Option A. Prioritize the migration to open-source virtualization platforms to reduce licensing costs, deferring detailed security audits until after the initial deployment. Option B. Expedite the migration by temporarily suspending security patching and update cycles for the virtualization infrastructure to minimize downtime during the transition. Option C. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment and phased implementation plan, integrating security and high availability measures throughout the migration process, followed by rigorous testing and validation. Option D. Implement a lift and shift migration of existing physical servers to virtual machines without significant architectural changes, focusing on immediate operational cost reduction. Correct answer is C. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment and phased implementation plan, integrating security and high availability measures throughout the migration process, followed by rigorous testing and validation. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge in balancing the immediate need for cost savings with the long-term implications of virtualization security and high availability, particularly within the context of the LPIC 3 virtualization and high availability exams, implied regulatory environment, which, for the purpose of this exam, we will assume aligns with general best practices for data protection and service continuity, without specifying a particular jurisdiction's explicit laws, as the exam itself is technology-focused rather than jurisdiction-specific. The pressure to reduce operational expenses can lead to overlooking critical security and availability considerations, potentially exposing the organization to significant risks. The correct approach, prioritizing a comprehensive risk assessment and phased implementation, represents best professional practice because it systematically addresses potential vulnerabilities and ensures that security and high availability are integrated from the outset, not treated as afterthoughts. This aligns with the principle of security by design and availability by design, which are fundamental to robust IT infrastructure. By conducting thorough testing and validation, the organization can identify and mitigate risks before they impact production environments, thereby ensuring compliance with implicit service level agreements and data integrity requirements. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on migrating to open-source virtualization platforms without a corresponding security audit would be professionally unacceptable. This overlooks the potential for misconfigurations or inherent vulnerabilities in less managed environments, which could lead to data breaches or service disruptions, violating implicit trust and data protection principles. Another incorrect approach, implementing a lift and shift migration without optimizing for the virtualized environment, fails to leverage the benefits of virtualization for high availability and resilience, potentially leading to performance issues and increased downtime, which is contrary to the goals of high availability. Finally, an approach that delays security patching and updates to minimize disruption during migration would be a critical failure, as it creates immediate and severe security risks, directly contravening the need for a secure and continuously available infrastructure. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the business objectives, followed by a thorough technical and security assessment of the proposed virtualization strategy. This involves identifying potential risks, evaluating mitigation strategies, and developing a phased implementation plan that includes rigorous testing and validation at each stage. Continuous monitoring and adaptation are also crucial to maintain security and availability in dynamic virtualized environments. Question 15. Process analysis reveals that a rapidly growing organization is deploying new virtual machines and containerized applications at an unprecedented rate to meet market demands. The current security team is struggling to keep pace with manual security reviews and audits of these new deployments, leading to concerns about potential vulnerabilities and compliance gaps with data protection regulations. Which of the following approaches best addresses this challenge while ensuring ongoing regulatory adherence and operational security? Option A. Integrate automated security policy enforcement and vulnerability scanning directly into the CI/CD pipeline to validate configurations and compliance before deployment. Option B. Increase the size of the security team to conduct more frequent manual post-deployment audits of all new virtual machines and applications. Option C. Empower the development teams to self-certify their deployments as secure, with the security team providing ad hoc guidance when requested. Option D. Implement a strict no-deploy policy until all new virtual machines and applications have undergone a comprehensive manual security review by the security team, regardless of development timelines. The correct answer is A. Integrate automated security policy enforcement and vulnerability scanning directly into the CI/CD pipeline to validate configurations and compliance before deployment. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in enterprise virtualization environments where the need for rapid deployment of new services conflicts with the imperative to maintain robust security and compliance postures. The pressure to accelerate time to market for critical business applications, coupled with the inherent complexity of virtualized infrastructure, creates a fertile ground for security oversights. The professional challenge lies in balancing agility with security, ensuring that new virtual machines and their associated configurations do not introduce vulnerabilities or violate established regulatory requirements, particularly concerning data protection and access control. The rapid pace of cloud-native development and containerization further exacerbates this, as traditional security perimeters become more fluid. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach emphasizes a proactive, integrated security strategy, implementing a robust, automated security policy enforcement mechanism that is embedded within the CI/CD pipeline is best professional practice. This ensures that security checks, such as vulnerability scanning, compliance validation against relevant regulations, e.g., GDPR, HIPAA, PCI DSS, depending on the jurisdiction and data handled, and secure configuration baselines, are performed before a virtual machine or container is deployed into production. This aligns with the principle of shift-left security, minimizing risk by addressing potential issues early in the lifecycle. Regulatory compliance is inherently met by ensuring that all deployed resources adhere to predefined, auditable security standards that are demonstrably aligned with legal and industry mandates. This approach fosters a culture of security ownership throughout the development and operations lifecycle. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves relying solely on post-deployment security audits. This is a reactive measure that fails to prevent vulnerabilities from entering the production environment. It represents a significant regulatory and ethical failure because it allows non-compliant or insecure systems to operate, potentially exposing sensitive data and violating data protection laws. Such a practice would be seen as negligent by regulatory bodies. Another incorrect approach is to delegate security responsibility entirely to the development team without providing them with the necessary tools, training, or clear security guidelines. This creates an environment where security is an afterthought or a burden, leading to inconsistent implementation and increased risk. Ethically, it fails to provide adequate support for team members tasked with security responsibilities. And regulatorily, it can lead to systemic noncompliance due to a lack of standardized security practices. A third incorrect approach is to implement security controls only at the network perimeter of the virtualized environment, assuming that internal traffic is inherently trusted. This castle and moat security model is insufficient in modern, distributed, and virtualized environments where threats can originate internally or lateral movement is a significant concern. It fails to address the principle of least privilege and microsegmentation, which are critical for containing breaches and are often implicitly or explicitly required by security regulations. Professional reasoning. Professionals must adopt a risk-based approach, prioritizing security measures that offer the greatest reduction in potential harm and compliance violations. This involves understanding the specific regulatory landscape applicable to the organization's data and operations, and integrating security into every stage of the virtualization lifecycle, from design and deployment to ongoing management and decommissioning. Continuous monitoring, automated policy enforcement, and a culture of shared security responsibility are paramount. When faced with pressure to deploy quickly, professionals should advocate for the integration of security into automated workflows rather than compromising on security standards, as the long-term costs of a breach or compliance failure far outweigh the short-term gains of speed. Question 16. Which approach would be most effective in ensuring that newly deployed virtual machines adhere to organizational security policies and regulatory compliance requirements from the moment they are operational? Option A. Establish a library of pre-hardened virtual machine templates that include baseline security configurations and compliance settings, and implement automated post-deployment validation scans to verify adherence. Option B. Deploy virtual machines directly from vendor-provided or generic templates and rely on post-deployment security patching and vulnerability remediation to address any security or compliance gaps. Option C. Focus solely on rapid virtual machine deployment to meet business demands, deferring all security and compliance considerations to a later, unspecified date. Option D. Implement security controls and compliance checks only after a security incident has been detected or a regulatory audit has been initiated. Correct answer is A. Establish a library of pre-hardened virtual machine templates that include baseline security configurations and compliance settings, and implement automated post-deployment validation scans to verify adherence. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in virtualization environments, balancing the need for rapid deployment of virtual machines, VM, with the imperative to maintain robust security and compliance. The pressure to deliver services quickly can lead to shortcuts that compromise security postures, potentially exposing the organization to significant risks, including data breaches, service disruption, and regulatory penalties. The professional challenge lies in identifying and implementing VM deployment strategies that are both efficient and secure, adhering to established best practices and relevant regulatory frameworks. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach emphasizes the integration of security and compliance checks into the VM lifecycle, from initial template creation to deployment and ongoing management. This aligns with the principle of security by design and compliance by design, which are fundamental to modern IT governance. By establishing hardened VM templates that include pre-configured security controls, patching, and compliance configuration, organizations can ensure that every deployed VM starts from a secure baseline. Automated scanning and validation post-deployment further reinforce this, catching any deviations or misconfigurations. This proactive and integrated approach minimizes the attack surface, reduces the likelihood of compliance violations, and ultimately supports the organization's overall risk management strategy. It is the most professional practice because it systematically addresses potential vulnerabilities and compliance gaps before they can be exploited or lead to regulatory issues. Incorrect approaches analysis. Deploying VMs directly from unverified or generic templates without security hardening or compliance checks represents a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This practice introduces unknown vulnerabilities and configuration drift, making the environment susceptible to attacks and noncompliance. It violates the principle of due diligence in IT security and governance. Relying solely on post-deployment security patching and remediation without a secure baseline is reactive and inefficient. While patching is crucial, it does not address inherent configuration weaknesses or compliance gaps present from the outset. This approach increases the window of exposure and the potential for misconfigurations to persist, leading to potential regulatory scrutiny and security incidents. Implementing security controls only after a security incident has occurred is a clear failure of risk management and proactive security. This approach is not only professionally unacceptable, but also demonstrably negligent, as it prioritizes response over prevention. It can lead to severe regulatory penalties, reputational damage, and significant financial losses. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a risk-based approach to VM deployment. This involves understanding the organization's threat landscape, regulatory obligations, and business requirements. The decision-making process should prioritize proactive measures that embed security and compliance into the VM lifecycle. This includes establishing clear policies and procedures for VM template management, automated security and compliance validation, and continuous monitoring. When faced with pressure to deploy quickly, professionals must advocate for the integration of necessary security and compliance steps, explaining the long-term risks and potential consequences of shortcuts. This involves clear communication with stakeholders about the trade-offs between speed and security/compliance. Question 17. The review process indicates that a critical virtual machine hosting sensitive financial data has experienced an unexpected failure. The immediate priority is to restore service to minimize business impact. However, the organization operates under a strict regulatory framework that mandates specific data recovery and audit trail requirements. Which of the following approaches best aligns with both the need for high availability and the regulatory obligations? Option A. Execute a documented disaster recovery procedure that includes restoring the virtual machine from a verified backup, performing comprehensive data integrity checks, and ensuring all recovery actions are logged for audit purposes, even if this extends the downtime slightly. Option B. Restore the virtual machine from a backup taken prior to the last scheduled maintenance window, as this is known to be a stable configuration, and defer any data synchronization until the service is fully restored. Option C. Initiate an immediate restore from the most recent available backup, prioritizing speed to bring the service online, and address data integrity checks and audit log verification after the system is operational. Option D. Attempt to restart the virtual machine in its current state, assuming the failure was transient, and only consider backups if the restart is unsuccessful, without formal data integrity verification. Correct answer is C. Initiate an immediate restore from the most recent available backup, prioritizing speed to bring the service online, and address data integrity checks and audit log verification after the system is operational. Explanation. The review process indicates a critical juncture in managing a virtualized environment's high availability. The challenge lies in balancing the immediate need for service restoration with the long-term implications of the chosen recovery strategy, particularly concerning data integrity and compliance with the specific regulatory framework governing this exam's jurisdiction. Professionals must navigate potential conflicts between speed of recovery and adherence to establish data protection and audit trail requirements. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a systematic, documented, and compliant recovery process. This involves not only restoring services, but also ensuring that the restoration adheres to the established recovery point objective (RPO) and recovery time objective (RTO), as defined by the organization's business continuity plan and relevant regulations. Verifying data integrity post-recovery is paramount to prevent data loss or corruption, which could have severe regulatory and financial consequences. Furthermore, maintaining an accurate audit trail of the recovery actions taken is essential for compliance and future incident analysis. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on rapid service restoration without verifying data integrity or adhering to documented procedures poses significant regulatory and ethical risks. This could lead to the restoration of corrupted or incomplete data, violating data protection mandates, and potentially leading to service disruptions due to subsequent data-related issues. Failing to follow documented recovery procedures can also result in an incomplete or inaccurate audit trail, making it impossible to demonstrate compliance during an audit or to effectively analyze the incident post-mortem. This undermines the principles of accountability and transparency required by regulatory bodies. Another incorrect approach might involve bypassing established change control processes for recovery, which, while seemingly expedient, introduces uncontrolled variables into the production environment. This can lead to unforeseen system instability, security vulnerabilities, and a breakdown in the audit trail, all of which are direct contraventions of best practices and regulatory expectations for controlled IT operations. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of the incident's scope and impact. This should be followed by an assessment of available recovery options against predefined RPO/RTO targets and the organization's business continuity plan. Crucially, any chosen recovery strategy must be evaluated for its compliance with the relevant regulatory framework, including data integrity verification and audit trail requirements. Documentation of the chosen strategy, the steps taken, and the verification results is essential throughout the process. Question 18. The analysis reveals that a financial services firm is implementing a new virtualized trading platform. The platform processes sensitive customer financial data and must adhere to strict uptime and data integrity regulations. The IT team is evaluating different high-availability strategies, but there is a lack of clarity on how the specific regulatory framework for financial data in this jurisdiction dictates acceptable RPO and RTO values, as well as data replication and storage requirements. Which of the following approaches best represents a professionally responsible and compliant method for selecting and implementing a high-availability solution for this trading platform? Option A. Prioritize the fastest possible failover and data synchronization methods available, assuming this will inherently meet all regulatory requirements for financial data. Option B. Focus solely on minimizing the cost of the high-availability solution, selecting the most budget-friendly option that offers basic redundancy, and address any potential compliance issues post-implementation. Option C. Conduct a thorough review of the application's RPO and RTO requirements, cross-reference these with the specific regulatory framework governing financial data in the jurisdiction, and select a high-availability solution that demonstrably meets both technical and compliance mandates. Option D. Implement a widely adopted, generic high-availability solution that has proven effective in other industries, with the expectation that it will be sufficient for financial data compliance. The correct answer is A. Prioritize the fastest possible failover and data synchronization methods available, assuming this will inherently meet all regulatory requirements for financial data. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in virtualization environments where a critical application's availability is paramount. The professional must balance the need for rapid recovery with the potential impact on data integrity and compliance. The challenge lies in selecting a high-availability strategy that not only meets the application's uptime requirements, but also adheres to the specific regulatory framework governing the data processed by the application. Without a thorough understanding of both the technical capabilities and the legal/compliance landscape, a suboptimal or non-compliant solution could be implemented, leading to significant business disruption, financial penalties, and reputational damage. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a detailed assessment of the application's recovery point objective, RPO, and recovery time objective, RTO, in conjunction with the specific regulatory requirements for data protection and availability. For instance, if the application handles sensitive financial data, regulations might mandate specific RPO/RTO thresholds or require certain data replication methods to ensure data integrity and prevent loss. Implementing a solution that aligns with these defined RPO/RTO and regulatory mandates, such as synchronous replication for near-zero RPO or automated failover with predefined validation steps, represents best professional practice. This ensures that the high-availability solution is not only technically sound, but also legally and ethically compliant, safeguarding both the business and its customers. Incorrect approaches analysis. Implementing a high-availability solution without first understanding the application's specific RPO/RTO and the governing regulatory framework is a significant professional failure. Example, choosing a synchronous replication solely for its lower network overhead might violate regulations requiring near-zero data loss, a very low RPO, leading to a regulatory breach. Similarly, deploying a solution with a longer RTO than permitted by compliance standards, perhaps due to manual intervention requirements during failover, would also be a failure. Another incorrect approach would be to implement a technically robust solution that, while meeting RPO/RTO, utilizes data handling or storage methods that are explicitly prohibited by the relevant jurisdiction's data privacy laws, such as storing replicated data in an unencrypted format where encryption is mandated. These approaches demonstrate a lack of due diligence and a failure to integrate technical solutions with legal and ethical obligations. Professional reasoning. Professionals must adopt a risk-based approach. This begins with a comprehensive understanding of the application's criticality and its data's sensitivity. This understanding must then be mapped against the specific regulatory requirements of the jurisdiction. The process involves 1. Identifying all applicable regulations and compliance standards. 2. Quantifying the application's RPO and RTO requirements. 3. Evaluating various high-availability technologies and strategies against both the technical requirements and the regulatory constraints. 4. Selecting the solution that best satisfies all criteria, prioritizing compliance and data integrity alongside availability. Regular review and testing of the implemented solution are also crucial to ensure ongoing adherence to both technical performance and regulatory mandates. Question 19. The risk matrix shows a high likelihood of critical data corruption and a moderate impact on service availability due to hardware failures. The organization's primary regulatory concern is maintaining data integrity and adhering to strict data retention policies. Which approach best addresses these combined risks and regulatory requirements for high availability? Option A. Implement synchronous replication for all critical data to a secondary site, coupled with automated failover procedures and regular documented testing of the entire disaster recovery process. Option B. Prioritize a cost-effective solution by using snapshotting technology with a longer recovery point objective, RPO, and a less frequent testing schedule for failover. Option C. Focus on rapid, asynchronous replication to a secondary site to minimize downtime, with a plan to manually reconcile data inconsistencies post-failover. Option D. Invest in redundant hardware at the primary site and rely on frequent, manual backups to a separate storage location for recovery. Correct answer is A. Implement synchronous replication for all critical data to a secondary site, coupled with automated failover procedures and regular documented testing of the entire disaster recovery process. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in virtualization and high availability, balancing the need for rapid disaster recovery with the regulatory and operational constraints of data integrity and security. The professional challenge lies in interpreting the risk matrix, which quantifies potential impacts, and translating those into actionable, compliant, and effective high availability strategies. The pressure to restore services quickly must be tempered by the absolute requirement to maintain data accuracy and adhere to data protection regulations. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a layered strategy that directly addresses the identified risks. By implementing synchronous replication for critical data, ensuring RPO/RTO targets are met without compromising data integrity, and establishing a robust, regularly tested failover process, the organization demonstrates due diligence. This aligns with the principle of least privilege and defense in depth, often mandated by regulatory frameworks concerning data security and availability. The emphasis on regular testing is crucial for validating the effectiveness of the HA solution and ensuring compliance with any stipulated recovery time objectives, RTO, and recovery point objectives, RPO. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on minimizing downtime without adequate consideration for data consistency would fail to meet regulatory requirements for data integrity. This could lead to data corruption upon recovery, rendering the restored data unusable and potentially violating data protection laws that mandate accurate and complete data records. Another incorrect approach that neglects regular testing of the failover mechanism, despite having a technically sound solution, is also professionally deficient. This oversight creates a significant risk that the HA system will not function as expected during a real disaster, leading to extended downtime and potential data loss, which would be a direct contravention of availability and data integrity mandates. A third incorrect approach that relies on outdated or unverified backup solutions for critical systems, even if they appear cost-effective, ignores the inherent risks of data degradation and the potential for prolonged recovery times, failing to meet the RPO/RTO defined by the risk matrix and regulatory expectations. A professional decision-making process should involve a thorough understanding of the risk matrix's implications, a comprehensive review of relevant regulatory frameworks, e.g., data protection, industry-specific compliance, and a detailed assessment of available HA technologies. The process requires evaluating each option against these criteria, prioritizing solutions that offer a demonstrable balance of availability, integrity, and compliance, and ensuring that all implemented solutions are rigorously tested and documented. Question 20. Quality control measures reveal that a critical virtual machine hosting a financial reporting application is exhibiting signs of data corruption, impacting its ability to generate accurate reports. The most recent snapshot was taken just before the corruption was detected. The organization operates under strict financial data integrity regulations. What is the most appropriate course of action to restore service while ensuring compliance and data integrity? Option A. Immediately restore the virtual machine from the most recent snapshot, assuming it is the least disruptive option, and monitor for further issues. Option B. Attempt to manually repair the corrupted data files on the live virtual machine to save time, without creating a new backup first. Option C. Rebuild the virtual machine from scratch and inform users that the corrupted data is irrecoverable. Option D. Restore the virtual machine from a verified, older backup that predates the corruption. Then perform comprehensive data validation and application testing before bringing it back online. The correct answer is D. Restore the virtual machine from a verified, older backup that predates the corruption. Then perform comprehensive data validation and application testing before bringing it back online. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge rooted in ensuring the integrity and availability of critical virtualized services while adhering to stringent regulatory compliance. The core difficulty lies in balancing the immediate need for service restoration with the long-term implications of data integrity and auditability, especially when faced with potential data corruption. A hasty recovery without proper validation could lead to the reintroduction of corrupted data, impacting business operations and violating data integrity regulations. The pressure to restore services quickly, coupled with the uncertainty of the corruption's extent, necessitates a methodical and compliant approach. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a phased recovery process that prioritizes data integrity and auditability. This aligns with best professional practices and regulatory expectations for data management and service availability. Specifically, it emphasizes restoring from a known good backup, followed by thorough validation of the restored data and the virtual machine's functionality. This methodical process ensures that the recovered service is not only operational, but also reliable and free from the original corruption. Regulatory frameworks often mandate data integrity and the ability to demonstrate a clear audit trail for recovery operations, which this approach directly supports. By isolating the affected VM and performing validation before reintegrating it into the production environment, it minimizes the risk of further propagation of issues and ensures compliance with data protection and business continuity mandates. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately restoring the VM from the most recent snapshot without verifying its integrity. This is a regulatory and ethical failure because it bypasses critical validation steps, potentially reintroducing corrupted data and violating data integrity requirements. It demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a disregard for the potential impact on downstream systems and data. Another incorrect approach is to attempt to repair the corrupted data directly on the live VM without a proper backup or rollback plan. This is professionally unsound and ethically questionable, as it risks further data loss or corruption, directly contravening principles of data preservation and responsible system administration. It also fails to provide an auditable recovery path, which is often a regulatory requirement. A third incorrect approach is to simply rebuild the VM from scratch without attempting to recover the data, assuming the data is irrecoverable. While sometimes necessary, this approach is incorrect if valid backups exist and could have been used to restore the data. It represents a failure to exhaust all reasonable recovery options, potentially leading to unnecessary data loss and a breach of business continuity obligations. It also fails to document the full recovery process, impacting auditability. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such a challenge should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes risk assessment, regulatory compliance, and data integrity. This involves 1. Understanding the scope and impact of the corruption. 2. Identifying available recovery options, including backups and snapshots. 3. Evaluating each option against regulatory requirements for data integrity, availability, and auditability. 4. Selecting the option that best balances recovery speed with the assurance of data integrity and compliance. 5. Documenting all steps taken, including validation procedures, to maintain a clear audit trail. This systematic approach ensures that decisions are not only technically sound, but also ethically responsible and legally compliant.